Hey everybody, welcome back. We're going to talk today about line of sight interactions. So what I have set up here is where I can walk up to an object. It tells me to interact with the object when I get there. And I can interact with it. And then as you can see here, it's increasing my base movement speed every time I pick up one of these guys. That's having a direct impact on my character. So let's get into it. To start off, you want to go to your project settings. For this, we're going to create a new trace channel. So if you go down in your project settings down to engine collision, and then you get down to the trace channel, you guys can create a new trace channel. And when you do that, you're going to name it interaction. And then we can set its default response to ignore. Since most things in the world are not going to be interactive, then we want to let that be the default thing where it's not going to interact with our trace channels. So click accept there. Then we're going to go and create a HUD that's going to be able to update the player. So for this is just a widget blueprint. I added a canvas panel. I added an image for a crosshair. And then I have an interaction prompt here. It's just some text that appears in the middle of the screen. I set it to be centered, and I positioned it where I think it would be most readable on screen. And we cleared that off, and that text just needs to be set as a variable up here. You can see that we have that. So when we go over to our graph, we can modify this text property by saying set the text. You could also create a bind function that would take care of this as well. But we have a custom event that's going to just set the text on that prompt. And then that's all that we need for this widget blueprint. With a widget blueprint made, I had my HUD inside of my HUD class. I just drew that on the screen so it would add it initially, and we just made sure we saved the widget as a reference object so that we can point to it later. And then we're going to need a blueprint interface. So while we created the widgets from doing right-click interface, widget blueprint, user widget, the interface is going to be created by going right-click blueprint and then blueprint interface. When you create a blueprint interface, it is simply the architecture for communication. It is none of the implementation that goes along with any of these functions. So inside of this interact BPI blueprint interface, I'm going to have an interact function. And in this interact function, we're going to have an input that's referencing the calling character. So we're just going to use the player character class, whatever class that is. And then we're going to have something called push interact prompt. And this is just going to be used to put the information on screen. All right, with those saved and compiled, because you always want to make sure you compile with blueprint interfaces, we're going to go over to our player character. So in addition to the core movement that we have here, I have two things going on for the player character. I have the interaction, which is going to get an interaction target and try to send off an interaction. Then I have this timer that's being started on event begin play. So from event begin play, I drew off a set timer by function name, and I created a function called scan for interaction. So this is something that's going to let us check to see if there is something in front of the player to look at so we can prompt the screen saying interact with object. So I just set this to 0.1. This is 5 times more efficient than running on a tick as like a 0.02 or less recurrence time. And so when I do this looping, of course, if your game can get away with having a less frequent update, then by all means use a slower timer. Then this is going to, on begin play, start this timer that's going to continually loop. So let's go look at that function here. So scan for interaction, it's a function that starts off and it's going to do a sphere trace by channel. And the reason I'm doing a sphere trace as opposed to a line trace, if I do this, we'll go for duration, set the duration to 1.5 seconds. So you can see that that sphere trace is going out in front of me. And then when it hits a thing that is an interactive, it's green. So if I did a line trace, I would have to be staring straight at the object, but this way it gives me a little bit of grace. So if I increase the size or radius of that sphere, it'll allow the player to get an interaction prompt even when I'm not looking straight at the object, which is really good for small objects or objects that have some level of opacity or masking or holes in their model, something like that. So this is just more quality of life. So with the sphere trace, we're doing sphere trace by channel because we set up a channel for interaction, and normally you just have visibility and camera, and we created this interaction channel here. And the start, where we're going to get the beginning of our trace for that, is going to get the player controller and the player camera manager. This is different than trying to fire a projectile because we want to make sure that it's what the player is actually looking at. Getting the camera manager actually gives us the location of where they're looking from. So the location of the typically center of the screen, and then we get the transform, we get the forward vector. And then from there, we're going to scale that by some value. So you can parameterize this as well to make this the interact detection range. And then we're going to add that onto the location of the camera manager to get the end result for the trace here. So we can turn this debug back off. So with that in place, then we're going to take the hit result and we're going to break hit result from the out. And if we get a blocking hit there, then we already know that the thing is an interaction type. We don't need to cast or do anything fun with that. What we're going to do is we're going to set the hit actor to our interaction target. And the interaction target is just a variable of type actor. So anything that we could have be interactable is going to be able to be set here. So this includes static meshes that are placed in the world. This includes interactive kinematic actors. This also includes things like NPCs and other pawns. So whatever it is that we deem to be interactive is going to be able to be dropped into this so that when we press the E key, then it will interact with this object specifically. So if I get a blocking hit, then I get an interaction target. If I don't get a blocking hit, then it clears my interaction target, sets it to null. That way I don't have anything that I would accidentally interact with after the fact. And then push interact prompt. This is going to be sending a message to that object, telling it to communicate whatever its thing is to the HUD, so we know what's going to happen when we interact. All right, so the event graph shows us that we have this interact behavior. And so the interaction target that we have here, if you're not familiar with how to get a validated get, I can take a regular get. We can click and drag and say get, or I can take this out here with a control click drag, and that'll get me a get value. And then when I have that, I can right click and say convert to validated get, which is, I could get the is valid node here. And if I check is valid and I get is valid or isn't valid, then this is basically the same code as doing a validated get. So with the validated get, I can say, if we do have an interaction target, then run interact. If not, then do nothing. And that's exactly what we want. Maybe in your game, if you want to interact and you want to provide like a depressing word sound whenever you try to interact and there's nothing there, then you can run that off of the is not valid. All right, so the interact was the message that we set up inside of our blueprint interface, right? So this is going to be attached to an object. So we're going to send that out to our interaction target. So let's talk about creating the interaction target. I created a blueprint actor class, and we implemented this interface over here. And to implement the interface, we went up to class settings, went down to implemented interfaces, and clicked add. And then I typed up my blueprint interface, which won't be in the list because it's already here. You can see it. Once you do that, compile, and then you'll get the list of any of the interface functions that are available listed over here. And then if I don't have this event interact, then if I right click over here, you can see implement event, or I can just double click and then that'll generate it here as well. So once I have the interface, what we're going to do is we're going to have first the event push interact prompt. So the push interact prompt is an event that's here. We were calling that inside of our scan for interaction. If you can recall here at the end, if we did have an interact target, then we would tell it specifically to push interact prompt. And so this push interact prompt here is going to do this function that we created inside of this class called push HUD prompt. And all that's going to do is get the HUD reference, and from the HUD reference, get the screen HUD ref, and then modify the text. So the update interact text is the function that we built back here in the HUD, update interact text. And that's in the HUD. The HUD has the reference to the screen. And then we can call the function from there just by diving down into the sub objects. And the interaction prompt is a variable that we create here so that every object can be interactive. Now, this class, this default one, is an abstract class, which means that we can't implement this into the world. And this is because we want to use this as a template for other things to inherit from. So we can create a child actor class from this, and it'll have all these properties, but this one is not meant to be used. We also have this cube over here, basically a static mesh. And the only thing that we've modified is we go down to collision here. We change the collision type from its default, or block all, to custom, and then it's a world dynamic object, and we're just going to change the interaction type from ignore to block, because if you can recall, our default interaction type for or our default interaction behavior was ignore, and so now we have it as block. This means that any of our trace channels, any of our traces that are running out, are going to be caught by this object. With that in play, this is the flip of the push. So push is going to send a text variable, and then the clear is going to send no text variable. And so in the event, this is going to be fired from the player class. Anytime we interact with the thing, it's going to fire off this message saying, hey, try to send a message, try to send a message, try to send a message, because this function scan for interaction is being called every 0.1 seconds. And so that scan for interaction is going to give us the prompt, and that prompt is going to allow us to update the HUD. And we added this retriggerable delay. So a retriggerable delay is just like a regular delay, except for if it gets a message to delay after it's already started counting and before it's finished, then it'll reset the timer. So it's not going to be like a regular delay. If you send a delay 3, 4, 5 hits during the course of its duration, it's just delaying each one of those. And so you'll get the 3, 4, 5 hits after the delay has passed. And this one, if I send 5 delays while it's, or 5 inputs while the delay is going on, only the last one will take the full duration, and it'll fire one time. So after that, after we've no longer gotten the input, basically meaning that the cursor is no longer aiming at the thing or it's no longer there, then we have the clear HUD prompt, so it'll zero that out. So by the default state, if an object disappears, is that eventually it will have a empty prompt for the player. And the event interact is an event that we're going to call from the character, from our event graph. We're going to try, if the interact target is valid, we're going to call interact on that target. And then that's just going to clear the HUD, and then whatever interaction is going to happen there, which don't need this, but the interaction that we're going to have is going to be customized per class that's inherited from this. And we can see that by going over to this BP collectible. You can see up here it is inherited from BPA interactable. This interactable object, it has the event interact, so I can select that from here and go down to the override and pull out interact. And then to get the parent interact behavior, which for us is basically just this one node, I could repeat that node, but in case that becomes more complicated later, I can compile this, and I can come here and we can grab all to parent function. And this allows us to get whatever functionality was happening before and pass that through. So if for some reason we're using that parent function, we can call that in here. And then after that, for this particular actor, we're going to destroy the actor and then modify the walk speed of the character. So this being passed through is kind of optional, but if you have anything that you want to affect the character, like picking up an item or getting a buff or something to the effect of having dialogue, right? The event interact, you're going to pass that back. If they have a dialogue, maybe with a storefront or something like that, then which character is having the interaction, and that it can control that through whatever means you have downstream. And then when that gets all put together, we have the ability to take objects into the world from our gameplay context. So for our BP, the abstract collectible should really be in this folder, and then we can just add it in there, and now when we walk up to it, interact, collect, and collect. And if you find that your interaction is too demanding for the player, you can always change your trace type to have a larger sphere, or to angle it or position it differently. I just use this one because I think it's pretty helpful to have the interaction be directly where the character is looking, so it's always oriented towards the space the player can see, as opposed to coming from the muzzle or the middle of their chest or something like that. So hopefully this gives you an idea of how to do line of sight interaction, lets you go out there and keep building.